to Salon Talks. I'm Amanda Marcotte, and my guest today is singer, songwriter, piano player, and all-around awesome Grammy Award-winning musician, Tori Amos. She has her 15th album out now. It's called Native Invader. Welcome to Salon Talks, Tori.
Hi, Amanda. Thank you for having me. Hey, everybody.
So, this album, you know, it's really concerned with themes of nature, environment, environmental destruction. And you've released it sort of in a period of time where we're seeing hurricanes batter the coast over and over again, wildfires in California. What's it like promoting an album that touches on these themes when these things are happening?
Well, my mother was attacked by a stroke and in January, and it felt as if Lady Liberty, America, the environment that the EPA has vowed to protect, the word protection, was also under attack. The idea of protecting our environment, our great mother, our resources. And as America pulled out of the Paris Accord, that also affected songs on the record. So there was a lot propelling the record into a place of where are we with climate change, where are we with how we treat our environment, and how is that change affecting people's lives, their homes, their world.
And you link your mother and the planet. How do you feel these kind of themes of maternity and motherhood sort of linked to the environment?
When Mary lost her voice, and she still hasn't gained it back, it became synonymous for me with the planet trying to speak out to us. And knowing Mary, it's very hard to describe that she was the center for everyone. She was so articulate and compassionate. I think that's the great thing about Mary, is she didn't have a bad word to say about anybody. She held a space for people to come and talk to her, similar as if you would curl up under a tree and feel sheltered there and take refuge there. And so I think with Mary losing her voice, it became clear how important it is to speak up and speak out for things that are happening around us, tragedies that are happening that we need to talk about and have a conversation about.
In the current political environment, you're seeing a lot of pressure on artists and celebrities like the NFL players that have been kneeling to shut up about political issues. What do you say to people who make this argument that you should sing or play or do these things but not talk about politics?
Well, I've been writing songs about issues since Me and a Gun came out in 1991 in the UK, that talked about sexual assault then. And through the records, this is the 15th studio album. There have been different albums that are dealing with different administrations, different policies, and that's just the path that I've chosen to take. I think that, sure, there are times when there's criticism, but you choose your path. You choose your path, and then you take the consequences for the path. But I'm ready to take any consequence for the path that I have chosen, whether Yo George, which I wrote about in 2007 on American Doll Posse, criticizing that administration and some of the decisions that were being made, or whether Scarlett's Walk was an album after 9/11. And during that time, there was a lot of, banning of music. Imagine was banned. So many songs were banned. And it was almost as if those in power utilized the tragedy of 9/11 to take control and then ban songs that might give people strength in order to write the narrative and funnel the country into war.
As somebody who's always had that kind of view of music, you know, we're obviously living in a very difficult time right now. How do you feel people can use music to empower themselves in times of difficulty?
Well, music's gift is that it can create a space for you, whether it's dance music and it gives you energy and you feel that you can be more free. If you have been pummeled from the day of, I've heard it termed political emotional whiplash that we're living through. And whether that's coming from Washington or from Hollywood, the latest tragedies that have come out of that story, music, I feel, has the ability to shift energy. And sometimes, I have a niece who works out to rap. And she'll get me trying to do, you know, the plank and all that stuff. I'd rather read a book, of course, to rap. Now, I'm not a big rap aficionado. I can't claim to know it. It's just not something I know. But she is an expert. And so if I'm going to work out with her, it has to be to rap. And I've begun to appreciate it because of how she loves it so much. So yes, I think music can transform a moment and take you to a different place.
I want to ask you some more about the album itself, but before I do, you mentioned the Hollywood situation and the Harvey Weinstein situation. And you've been an activist and an outspoken advocate on behalf of sexual abuse victims for a long, long time now. And I think in the sense that when you first kind of started doing this, it was a very different world in a lot of ways. Do you feel things have changed much since you first started speaking about these issues, or do you think we're kind of treading water?
Well, the fact that this is just being exposed in 2017, and it took till 2017 and some brave artists, these women, to come forward, says to you that even though I think people have been speaking out about it, when does the culture change? On one hand, yes, there are people that, survivors and people that love survivors and care, that since I've been a part of the movement with the song 1991, Me and a Gun, but the RAIN movement was from 1994, and that's a hotline that is there to help direct survivors to their next step and stage. But the fact that it's taken this long, and it does make me think, well, what this time has to be different? What do we have to not now fall asleep on after the outpouring of experiences? We cannot rest now. We have to demand a protocol to be put into place in the workplace so that even if you have a pervy CEO somewhere, and there will be pervy CEOs, and there'll be pervy office people, and pervy musicians, and pervy actors and directors, and pervy presidents of in all places. So what we have to realize, though, is that you can't control what's in the mind of someone, but you can have boundaries and protocols in place so that there are consequences if people behave inappropriately.
So I was geeking out over this record last night. It was I love it. It's great. And I really admired the guitar work, especially on there. I think that's not necessarily what were originally known for really doing a lot of. Tell me what are some of the influences on this record that you kind of drew on to write it?
All kinds. I think the choice we made was that the keyboards and the guitar were having a conversation. In this record and the last record, Unrepentant Geraldines, we focused a lot on what the mid-range was doing. Mm-hmm. So what the vocals, the guitars, and the piano, because they're the melodic instruments. And we decided in a song like Chocolate Song, for example, which is about a couple unraveling and falling apart, and throwing knives at each other while making chocolate, which is always a tightrope act, that there had to be in the instrumentation that had to be conveyed. So that's really what the arrangement focus was about. And then we would get everything else around those instruments in place.
You know, and you mentioned making chocolate as a metaphor. You've always had this ability to like come up with the most odd little metaphors, like making chocolate, or you know, when I asked my Facebook followers what to ask you about, a number of people asked, "Why cornflake girl?"
Well, because at the time, one of my best friends was, and is still, an African-American, part native gal from Brooklyn who I met in London and is still in London. And we would hang out together and go all over Europe together and come to America together too. And we had this language. And it might seem like a crazy language, but she was running around with people like Miss J from that fashion TV show and that sort of fantastic poetic talk. And this way of describing things rubbed off on me. And therefore, betrayal, people who would betray each other would be cornflake girls. And your true blue friends who wouldn't betray you would be raisin girls. And so we could have a conversation in a very tense setting in the entertainment business when we're making a video. We could have a complete conversation in this language. And it was real words, but we knew our definitions, and that song was a reflection of our language.
And yet I feel like it still translates to people. They may not know exactly what you're talking about, but they still kind of get it.
Well, it's about betrayal, about friends betraying each other or disappointing each other. And yes, there are two sides to every story. And sometimes we can't think of our friends or our friend that we're having a bit of a conflict with, or a contentious moment, unfortunately. We can't always see their point of view because we can see our point of, we know exactly what happened from our lens, but it is very tricky to say, okay, hang on, I'm going to set my lens down and walk over here and try and look at my point, your point of view, and what I did through your lens.
Yeah.
That's tricky to do. And that's what the song was trying to do, but I don't think she did that. I think she decided that she was right.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I mean, me.
Oh.
Tori thought she was right. And so that's why this is not really happening. You bet your life it is. When confrontation is happening, I'm sure some of you feel that way sometimes. You think, how did we get here?
Yeah.
How did we get to this place? We were making chocolate, and now we're throwing knives at each other and breaking plates. How did that happen?
So your daughter sings on the album with you. What was that like, having your daughter singing with you on this record?
She, once we pulled out of the Paris Accord, we decided to join forces on something that she felt was important to her generation, important to all generations, but that the teenagers, their voices weren't necessarily getting represented. we were made aware of Juliana versus the United States, this case of teenagers and a little older now suing the U.S. government because of how they're handling the environment. And yes, it did start under the Obama administration. That's when the suit began, and they're continuing it because they just feel like their voice isn't being heard. So we decided to be part of a song together that would be talking about the climate deniers. I
actually interviewed one of the kids on that last. Yeah, they're pretty great kids. You know, I think they know that it's a long shot, but it's an attempt to inject just that into the conversation. This like notion that teenagers matter.
Yeah, that's right. And they'll be left with the world and the decisions that are being made about their world. They'll be left to deal with it.
And how does your daughter feel about like this kind of new level of exposure, getting your voice out in the world? That must be nerve-wracking for someone her age.
She's been singing on the record since she was really little, Midwinter Graces. Oh, wow. So we recorded that. In 2009, we recorded it. So she was 9 years old.
Oh, wow.
Her first, I was talking to Barry, who I work with too, and he was saying, do you remember that tune Tash was writing when she was 7 years old? And she just started singing it to us, and I said, what was it called? He goes, Daisy, don't you remember? I said, oh, I think I remember Daisy. And it's just something she's been doing so long that Mark and I don't think a lot about it because we jam. We've been jamming with her since she's really little. She'll just sit and hang out and sing Christmas songs while we jam. That's just how that's how we communicate. But it's very private, and yet as the years go on, she'll pop up on she was on Holly, Ivy, and Rose, and she shows up on different things every so often. But she's writing her own songs now, so she's kind of moving away from Mom's world into her teenage thing, which is great and important.
So a friend of mine who's a jazz musician wanted me to ask you this. And he said he understands if it's too personal, but considering that you're such a road warrior, you're such a hardworking musician, he wanted to know if you have any kind of pre-performance ritual that you do to sort of give yourself energy and, you know, for the performances you're so legendary for.
Well, there is a discipline to it. And I think a few things. There's several reasons I do meet and greets, but it does connect me with the audience, those that are coming that night, and some of the issues, things that they've noticed in the town you're playing in, so you can be very present with where you are. The sound checks are imperative. I have long sound checks when I can. No less than an hour and a half. If I can push it to 2, I will, because that's when I sit alone with the crew and really work through possibilities for the show that night. The show starts with a specific song, and then when there's a set change, that song is locked in. But then pretty much anything can change. So that's about sound checking it and making sure that I've brought it up, it's been lit, and we've worked it through. And then that means you're all ready, then you're in your cauldron. So you're there with your brew simmering from sound check onward. Sound check starts at 4. The show might not be till 8:50. It was that in Europe, it might not be in the States. But by then you're in a 4-hour already journey that I don't break. I don't get on the phone. I don't break it. I don't talk to the outside world because I can't step into my personal life. I have to be in my songwriter containment life. So it's about containing the songs that I start containing at 4 o'clock on the soundcheck stage. So by the time I've walked on stage, it's been 4 hours and 50 minutes with the sage burning, and the set list has been written, and the focus has been almost 5 hours of the show. So I will have been in 5 hours before then I walk into the almost 2 hours. So it's a 7-hour focus and discipline.
That's amazing.
But that's the way
Yeah.
you ground it. I'm not hiding any secrets, but it is about that time commitment. Because if I stepped out into some kind of petty argument of what's going on with some pipe in the at the beach house, bloody hell, then I have to deal with that at another time.
So just complete focus. Would you
Focus.
recommend that to others, or you feel it's more for you?
You have to find your own way to ground yourself and plug in, because I see it as a plug coming back out of the back of my spine, and I plug deep down in, through, below the venue, deep into the mains of the city, deep into the energy. And then you're opening up your antennas for the songs to come, so you're pulling down. But that takes complete, you have to be a container in order to contain the energy in the songs and the sacred pact that you've made with the audience who are your collaborators. And the idea is that we all were exchanging information and energy during the show.
I've seen you in concert, and I can say that you seem to really give all of yourself to the audience. It feels very vulnerable and emotional in a lot of ways. Does it ever feel like too much for you?
Well, when I've put my when the stagecraft is in place and that's the chops and the sound check and the warm up, as well as when the intention's in the right place, then no, it might be many things. It's a journey through a show, exploring different emotions and different songs that are singing about experiences that might have been traumatizing. But the idea is to transmute that and turn it into something else, a liberation. And that to me is the alchemy of it, of the transmutation.
So I think, time for one more question. When you first started working and putting out music, I think there was a lot of hostility towards women like yourself who were very feminist in their music and very outspoken about these issues. What kind of advice would you give young women that want to have a similar career path, that want to be musicians but not have to kowtow to sexism, patriarchy, whatever you want to call it?
Well, I would say that there was also a time in the early 90s, it was an exciting time because for whatever reason, there was a different path up the mountain that wasn't so commercially dominated. And yet, up until recently, there's very much been a commercially dominated sort of, path that the industry's been taking. But with the last year, with events and with issues becoming so important that people are discussing, people's attention is, they don't just seem to want necessarily songs that, you could listen to in the dentist chair and it doesn't really matter. The drill isn't going to miss because you're not going to be in tears or anything. So, and you have to have a sense of humor with that, please, folks, come on. So, because with Leonard Cohen, I don't know if I could listen to Leonard Cohen and those great songs that take you to places where I wouldn't be able to necessarily be at a party and listen to Leonard Cohen. I think there's a time now, and it's an unusual time, where we need our poets, our artists, our musicians that have more substantial things to say than just you know, their sexual meter or thermometer that day, or how hot he makes me feel, or how hot I want to make him feel, or whatever. And I'm sure there's Shakespeare in that, and I haven't found it yet. But it has its place. It has its place. Yeah. And I understand that the record labels and some of the publishers push that narrative. But I would say to you that I'm seeing, and I've been on the planet since 1963, and I'm seeing something that I saw in the 60s, in the late 60s and early 70s, of a shift that the public is demanding, and we're just seeing this happen over the last week. It's almost as if enough.
Yeah.
And therefore, I would say, artists, now is the time to sharpen your pen, because as far as the labels need to wake up, there will be a market to hear your narrative that might be less commercial, but it might be in more step with what the public is talking about now.
That's a cool thought. Well, thank you. My guest today has been Tori Amos. The album is called Native Invader. Thank you so much for being on Salon Talks,
Thanks,
Tori.
Amanda. Thank you.